Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. This hour we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about this book, which we've mentioned before, but we thought we would come back and give it a maybe even a fuller more interview, and that is The Uniform of Leadership. Came out in July. Lessons on True Success from My ESPN Life, and it's written by Jason Romano, and I might just mention we have information about him on the website, host and producer of Sports Spectrum podcast. Also a contributor to Sports Spectrum magazine, writes a number of articles for sportspectrum.com. But during his time at ESPN, really created and produced a number of things, of course, Sports Central, Monday Night Football, and a variety of others that you would all be familiar with. But this is a book that talks about some of the lessons that he learned at ESPN. You think about learning lessons in terms of leadership in the military, maybe in business, but yes, you can learn them as well at ESPN. So, Jason, welcome back to Point of View.
Kerby, it's great to be back. Thanks so much for having me.
Once again, remind people how you ended up there. Of course, obviously, anybody that loves sports knows ESPN, but in some respects, I thought it'd be good just to kind of give people kind of the background story once again.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I never even dreamed about working at ESPN as a kid because it felt so out of reach. You know, I was a kid, grew up, loved sports, played sports, watched it. It was my God in a lot of ways. And, you know, through that, decided once I realized I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, probably in my teen years, that, well, I could talk about sports or pursue a career in sports broadcasting. And so did that, went to college, got a career, started out of college in local radio in my hometown of Albany, New York, and then ESPN came calling around 3 years later, 20 years ago, if you will, in the year 2000, and started my career off there, and it was a blast. It was so much more than I could have expected, just working in a place where, you know, quite frankly, was a dream of mine in terms of what you watch growing up. You know, and again, I don't think I dreamed big enough to think I could actually work there. But once I got there, I was living the dream job. Let's just put it that way.
Certainly. Again, we have a link to your website, jasonromano.com. And one of the things you talk about early on in the book, but also on your website, is the question, what uniform are you wearing? The uniform of leadership. And I love how you kind of take us through, you know, when we wear uniforms, we figure out it's just to really basically separate one particular team from another. But there's a lot more that goes into that. And as a Christian, you've really begun to think about this as well. What uniform are we going to wear, and how are we going to apply our biblical ideas in the environment in which we were? Up until fairly recently, though, you were thinking, probably need to hide some of that, you know, maybe you need to cover over that uniform. But speak to that issue, if you might.
Yeah, Kerby. So the uniform, it's one of those things, it's sort of a metaphor, you know, that you're trying to find kind of a sports connection to this metaphor of the uniform of leadership. So every day we wake up, we have a choice to make. Who are we going to play for? What team are we going to play for? Because every day, all of us wake up, we put on this sort of, you know, metaphorical uniform and make a decision on the team that we're going to play for first. And quite often, because of the selfishness that's within us and the nature of who we are and the things that kind of distract us every day, you know, the very first team that we think about playing for is ourselves. Now, if you look at a uniform, a typical sports uniform, there's a name on the front. That's usually the team. and then the name on the back, that's usually the athlete or the player.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say when we wake up, we have to make a decision. Are we going to play for the team on the front, or are we going to play for the name on the back?
Yes.
And a lot of us mix that up, including myself. For many years, I would wake up, and the first thing I'd think about was Jason and not others, or in essence, God. And so wearing the uniform of leadership properly is having God first, it's placing others second, or the team second, and then ourselves third. I call it I am third. And it's really important, I think, for all of us, especially those of us who are Christians, to get that order in its proper place. It's something that we mess up. We're going to mess up every day. Thank God for his grace. But I think when we get it right, when we realize every day that our job is to love God and love others first and then ourselves, man, I think that's when things start to line up and really, really align in the proper way.
We've been pleased that on one occasion we've had Tony Dungy in studio, and you talk about early on that it was one question by Tony Dungy, which was very significant because he was on Mike and Mike, and then he asked you a question that really got you thinking and really, in some respects, changed the direction of your life, didn't it?
It absolutely did, and I'm so glad you brought this up because Coach Dungy, just like you had him in your studio, we had him at ESPN at our studios about 10 years ago, 2010. And my job at that point was a producer. I was booking the talent and securing the guests to come in and be on the different shows at ESPN. We called it the ESPN Car Wash.
Mm-hmm.
And it had nothing to do with cars or water. It was just a day of interviews at ESPN. And so Coach Dungy is coming, and he's promoting his book, The Mentor Leader, and I'm excited because as a believer, I'm a younger believer at that time, but I'm a believer, and I know that he is too, and I'm thinking, wow, this is going to be such a great day to spend with someone who has, his faith in its proper place, and maybe we'll get to talk about matters that are a little bit deeper than just the regular sports conversation that I have every day. And so we find ourselves in the green room adjacent to the Mike and Mike studios after he finishes his interview on Mike and Mike, and, he's curious and kind of asks me a question. Finds out from his people that he's with, his producers and associates, that I'm a Christian. And so he says, Jason, I understand you're a follower of Christ. I have one question for you. How do you live your faith out in the workplace here at ESPN?
Mm.
And I've never been asked that question, Kerby, and I was kind of caught off guard, and I really didn't have a good answer. In fact, I told Coach Dungy, I don't even think that's possible. How silly am I when I think back now?
Yeah.
I said, I think the way I'm supposed to be living out my faith is if I'm going to do that, I need to go work for a place like, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes or some sort of ministry or sports ministry, not at a place like ESPN. Well, it wasn't Coach Dungy. The question that he asked changed my life, but the response from his assistant, Jessica, was what really got me going. She stood right in front of Coach Dungy before he could respond, and I know he wanted to, and she looks at me kind of with this stern look and says, listen, you don't really get what Coach was asking here, do you? Look at where you work. And I said, yeah, I work at ESPN. She's like, no, look at the ministry. Look at the light that you can be to all of these people. There's 4,000 people here on campus at ESPN, and what a great opportunity for you to be the light of Christ to all of these people. And I just got it. It's like a light bulb just shined brightly above my head, and it made sense. I said, oh, I get it now. That's what you mean. I can be, and here's what happened, Kerby. That day going forward, I went from being a producer at ESPN who happened to be a Christian to being a Christian who happened to be a producer at ESPN. And that order is really important because for me, I understood and I recognized, oh, wait, I'm a follower of Christ first wherever I go, whether it's to the workplace, whether it's at the house with my wife and my daughter, whether it's at church, whether it's at the market, at the gas station, wherever I go, I'm a follower of Christ first, and that order is important. So that's why that question changed my life. And going forth, it really helped me kind of align in its proper form what it was like to be a believer in the workplace. And I know a lot of us struggle with that.
Sure. Let's take a break. And first of all, we wanted you to know about the book. Of course, we've talked about this before, and we have it available again, both in hardback and in Kindle. But we also have a link to his website. Back then, we weren't sure about speaking opportunities, but we're going to talk about that, too, because you may want to have him come and speak at your gathering. So we'll talk about this right after that.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Nearly half of American adults report sometimes or always feeling lonely. That same study by Cigna also found that nearly the same percentage reported feelings of being left out. That is why they say loneliness is at epidemic levels. 25 years ago, I wrote a book, Signs of Warning, Signs of Hope, making a number of predictions for the future. Chapter 8 set forth the case for a coming crisis of loneliness. Years later, Philip Slater wrote about the pursuit of loneliness. The U.S. Census Bureau documented the increasing number of adults living alone. Dan Keeley talked about living together loneliness in one of his books. And Roberta Hestonese coined the term crowded loneliness. This trend was there for anyone to see if they began reading some of the sociological literature. Of course, lots of people have written about the crisis of loneliness since then. Robert Putnam wrote about it in his famous book, Bowling Alone. He argues that people need to be connected in order for our society to function effectively. Putnam concludes social capital makes us smarter, healthier, safer, richer, and better able to govern a just and stable democracy. In his book, Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal, Senator Ben Sasse laments that our traditional tribes and social connectedness are in collapse. All of this comes at a cost. Julianne Holt-Lundstedt has published research showing that people with weaker social ties had a 50% increased likelihood of dying earlier than those with stronger ones. Being disconnected, she says, is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The loneliness epidemic has arrived. Pastors and churches need to address this dangerous trend. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jason Romano with us for a few more minutes, and if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to move on to another topic at the bottom of the hour, but again, this book is entitled The Uniform of Leadership, Lessons on True Success from My ESPN Life. And first of all, I might just mention that the book is one that is set up, Jason, for any kind of discussion. We have a number of people that listen to this program that are in leadership positions already. They are pastors, they're Sunday school leaders, Bible fellowship leaders, small group leaders. At the end of the 18 chapters that you usually have about 4 points, kind of bullet points of discussion, and those are available so that if somebody said, I'd really like to kind of talk about this issue of leadership, I want to talk about this maybe with kids that love sports, maybe they already run a fellowship of Christian athletes or some kind of sports outreach, this would be just ideal to hear from somebody that worked at ESPN and along the way really help them to get their priorities straight and recognize that they need to play for the uniform name on the front, not the back. So that is certainly available. But also, I've clicked on the button on your website, which we've made available for individuals for speaking. And when we talked to you back a number of months ago, I recognized at that time the chances of you going and speaking to a fellowship of Christian athletes, a church or a conference or something like that were kind of slim and none. But now I think that is a possibility, and there's a video for people to watch that kind of gives them a little bit of an idea on that. So talk about what would be available based upon your book, the discussions, and even speaking that might be something that our listeners might want to take advantage of.
Yeah, thank you, Kerby. It's been a neat thing to watch, especially since I left ESPN. The doors that have opened to be able to speak and kind of travel across the country pre-pandemic, we'll say. And, of course, the pandemic hits and, anybody who does any kind of speaking or traveling, everybody was kind of shut down in that area. And I was fortunate to be able to join that Zoom that everybody's had to join and be able to kind of still connect with different people. But now that some of these areas across the country are opening up, in fact, I was able to speak at an FCA event in my hometown of New York in Albany last week. And that's what's really been neat about this book is being able to kind of share, go through the discussion questions, for a group like a men's group or, even a church or a high school, wherever it might be, any kind of, college setting. This book is not just written for Christians, although if you are a Christian, it will probably resonate a little bit more. But it's really a book to go through with a team. If you're a manager in an office, you could get this book and go through it with, some of the people that you work with to just learn how to be a better leader. And maybe it sparks something inside of you that maybe challenges you in a way that you weren't thinking about before. Maybe you are playing for that name on the back a little bit more than you'd like. And so that's been a really neat thing to watch. And, yeah, being able to kind of go and share, at different conferences in the past and being able to speak at men's groups and, churches, like I said. I've gone to colleges and been able to kind of give some talks there, especially to teams in schools, to athletes. Having that ESPN connection, I think, is nice to be able to kind of start the questions off with, some sports and have some fun that way. So I've been blessed, and I'm thankful for any opportunities, honestly, because it's not something I'm necessarily seeking or pursuing, but God continues to open up doors, and, I want to walk through those and be as obedient as I can.
Let's, if we can, give people just a sample of some of that. And last time we had you on, we were talking about Drew Brees, and you've had a chance to meet some of these sports figures. Of course, there's a picture of you and Darryl Strawberry and a number of others that are just outstanding individuals. But I love the story about Drew Brees, because here is a guy that is still playing and in some respects has to stay really in shape, and yet you actually were able to work with him and actually began to see his level of humility and what a gracious individual he was. So you might share that, because it's a good example of the kind of thing I know you would share when you speak to an audience about some of these issues.
Absolutely. I love the Drew Brees story, and when we decided to write the book, I was thankful that we were able to include it, because that was one of those crazy days that you work at ESPN. In fact, for me, it was the longest day I ever worked at ESPN. I came in at 8 in the morning to spend 8 hours with Drew Brees, and then went right back to my desk and spent another 8 hours working on the LeBron James free agency story that was going on that day as well. So that was quite the crazy day. But listen, Drew Brees at that point was a Super Bowl MVP. He had just won his first Super Bowl. He was in the prime of his career, and he's coming to ESPN, much like Coach Dungy in the story I told you a little earlier. And Drew is coming. It's just him and his assistant and Todd, his publicist. And, I got a very unique request from Drew's people when he was coming. They said, listen, we know that he's going to be doing a bunch of interviews, and that's what the schedule would look like. But Drew would like to take about an hour and a half, 2 hours in the middle of the day to work out. Now, that might not sound so odd to those listening right now, because he's an athlete, he's a football player. Well, that makes sense. Well, most people who come to ESPN don't request time to work out. They usually just work out around the scheduled, and then when they come to ESPN, they're focused right there. But Drew had his plan. He knew that middle of the day, that's when he needed to get his workout in. And I saw this man, go to the gym, then come outside and throw footballs in front of our cafeteria with his assistant, with his agent, and go through about 20 minutes of real intense workout throwing the football. And this was 2 weeks, Kerby, 2 weeks before training camp started. And it's the middle of July. And
Yes.
I remember telling Drew Brees this. I said, Drew, why are you doing this right now? Why don't you just take a day and enjoy your summer, because training camp's starting in 2 weeks. You just won a Super Bowl. Nobody's going to fault you if you took a day off. And he said, Jason, two things. Number one, this is how I honor God by continuing to work in an excellent fashion, like it says in Colossians, to do all that you do for the glory of God. So I'm honoring God in the way that I'm working here. But number two, I have a team that's depending on me. So if I take a day off, that might take a chance. That might be one day that I'm missing that could help my team be better this year. And, Drew Brees is one of the all-time great NFL players, but when you hear that coming out of the mouth and then you see it from this Hall of Fame player, you understand what separates him from, pretty much any other quarterback other than maybe the Tom Brady's and the Joe Montanas of the world, is that mindset to not only be great to serve his teammates, but also to honor God in the way that he was working out that day. And I'll never forget that day, because that was such a great lesson for me to witness, and to be able to share with others now is so cool, because now you see 10 years later, he leads the NFL all time in passing yards and touchdowns, and he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And 10 years ago, right after he had won a Super Bowl, he was doing the exact same thing that he's doing now. It was pretty cool.
And also, I think if I remember right, he also said, there's another quarterback that wants my job, so I need to keep working on that as well.
Yeah, I thought that was so funny. Like, Drew Brees, there's nobody chasing your job, Drew, but he said that. He said, listen, I don't know if my job is secure. And I'm thinking, amazing? What are you talking about? You're Drew Brees. But he said, there's two guys behind me that want my job. And so if I'm not working out today, that might be another day that they are, and, I want to keep my job. And I thought, what a mentality, not only to serve his teammates, but to also continue to understand that there are people chasing after what he wants, and it's a privilege and an honor to be where he was, but not to take that for granted.
Again, if you'd like to get a copy of the book, it is certainly available in your local bookstore. It's published by our good friends at Kriegel Publications, so you might be able to find it there. But also, we've made it very easy for you to get a copy of it by going to Jason's website. Of course, we have information about it as well for both hardback and Kindle. And if people go there, they can contact you and interact with you and maybe even schedule you for a speaking engagement. So, Jason, I appreciate you taking the time to join us once again, and I hope that generate some opportunities for you in the future, because I know that the lessons you have in your book need to be passed on to the next generation. So thank you for your diligence and wanting to do that.
Kerby, thanks so much for having me again. I really appreciate it. It was wonderful talking with you.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to change topics. As I warned you at the beginning, we're going to be doing almost a different topic every half hour, and that is we're going to have Susan Michael with us. She has been the individual that helped develop the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. We're going to talk about what is the significance of this peace accord. She argues that it really is kind of a deadly blow to some of these anti-Semitic campaigns. And as we are starting to try to understand what it means to have this kind of peace accord between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and maybe even in the future with other countries, what is the significance of that? And we'll also spend a little bit of time helping you understand about the Christian Embassy there in Jerusalem. So this is just a great opportunity to learn more from her. And, of course, one of the articles we've posted is a piece that appeared in Charisma about this particular issue. And also we've posted one more, Nobel Peace Prize being nominated to President Donald Trump. So we'll get into some of those issues and give you a chance, if you'd like to, in this last half hour to express your opinion. Maybe you have some questions about Israel, about anti-Semitism, about the peace accord, even about the election. We'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we're going to talk about Israel. We're going to talk about the Abraham Accords and a number of other issues that are front and center. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We first of all have a link to this very important organization called the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem. And we have a link to that on our website. We also have a blog by the guest that we're going to be talking about that gets into preparing to tabernacle with God, the Feast of Tabernacles, Tabernacles, also one that came out back in August, What the Abraham Accords Mean for Israel. We've also posted an article that came from Charisma in which they were quoting from Susan Michael about how the Israel United Arab Emirates peace accords are a deadly blow to anti-Semitic campaigns. And again, those of you that don't already have this, we have a booklet that I've put together on a biblical view on anti-Semitism. Susan Michaels has been more than 35 years pioneering the development of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem and currently serves as the ministry's USA Director and a member of the Board of Directors. So, Susan, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you. It's really great to be with you today.
Talk about this organization, because I think this may be the first time we've actually talked about, on Point of View, the International Christian Embassy. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes, it's a very unique organization with a very unique history, headquartered there in Jerusalem. We were founded in 1980 at the time that the Israeli government passed a bill declaring Jerusalem to be the eternal and undivided capital. And there was tremendous international uproar against that. The Arab countries threatened oil embargoes on any country that recognized Jerusalem. So all of the embassies that were in the city literally packed up and moved out in protest. And there was a group of Christians there that were organizing the very first Christian celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles. They had about 1,000 Christians there from, 15 countries. And they seized the opportunity and they said, we do not support what our governments have done. And therefore, we're starting an international Christian embassy in Jerusalem that represents the millions of Bible-believing Christians around the world that understand the significance of Jerusalem and stand with Israel. So that's how we got started. It's a very unique starting and unique role there that we've been playing for 40 years now. So we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. But we have really two aspects to our ministry, and one is to be there in Israel, representing the global church in support of Israel. And then secondly is out in the nations where we do a lot of education and speaking in churches and just providing educational resources about Israel, about the biblical significance of Israel. And so that in a nutshell is what we do, but it's a very unique ministry.
Let me pursue, just since you mentioned in passing the idea of the tabernacles, the Feast of the Tabernacles. You have a whole section on holidays and traditions. I've been in Israel when they've actually had the Feast of Tabernacles, and they build those rather rustic situations around the city. But talk about that significance, since that's actually something you just posted a few days ago.
Well, yes, it's at the heart of our ministry. We were born out of celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles. So, and the reason is because in the late 70s, there were a group of Christians living there in Jerusalem, and they prayed together regularly, and they had two burdens on their heart. And one was the need to start a ministry in support of Israel, because none existed then. But secondly was the need to bring an awareness to the global church about the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, why? That's because the Feast of Tabernacles is one of the three feasts of Israel in the Bible, and the Christian church knew all about the other two feasts. The first one is Passover, which has Christian fulfillment in the death and resurrection of Jesus. The second one is Shavuot, or Pentecost, which has a Christian fulfillment and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. But the Feast of Tabernacles is still forward-looking. It's still to be fulfilled. It's a prophetic feast. And the prophet Zechariah actually prophesied that one day the Gentiles, the nations, would come up to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. And so we felt we needed to begin to bring an awareness of this to the church. And now 40 years later, lots of churches teach about the Feast of Tabernacles, and they may even have their own little celebration of it. And every year we draw 6,000 Christians from all over the world to Jerusalem for a week-long celebration of it. Now, biblically, what is the Feast of Tabernacles about? It's both looking back and looking forward. So it's to commemorate God's protection and covering over the Israelites when they were in the wilderness. And that's why they build those little flimsy booths that you were describing.
That's right.
It's to remember that, and they're supposed to even be able to see through the roof of it to the sky above as a reminder that God is above them and was their protector and their provider in the wilderness. But once they entered the Holy Land, then God's provision came in the form of rain. So it became a harvest feast where they celebrated the annual harvest, and they prayed for rain for the next year because they would need it for the next harvest. But prophetically, from the very beginning, there was always an element of interceding for the nations during the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's an expression of God's heart that all the nations would be a part of his kingdom and would be worshiping him and celebrating in Jerusalem. And that's why the prophet Zechariah actually predicted that one day they will. So we are not a fulfillment of Zechariah. We're just practicing for it and preparing the nations and the churches around the world for it.
Susan Michael with us, and again with the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. Let's talk about, if you will, the Abraham Accords. That is one of the articles that is on your blog, and we have a link to it on the website. But also I posted this one article in which you also point out that this peace accord is a deadly blow to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is unfortunately increasing around the world, but what is the relationship then between the so-called Abraham Accords, or the peace accord between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, to this issue of anti-Semitism?
Well, I'll tell you, I was recently interviewed by another radio program that I won't name, and it ended up, I was questioned by someone who was very anti-Semitic and began throwing out all of these accusations against Israel that they're committing genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. And why on earth would an Arab country like the United Arab Emirates sign a peace accord with Israel if they were really carrying out genocide against Arab peoples? It's a deadly blow to the lies that Israel is doing these terrible things to the Palestinians. It shows that it's not true. It's been a lot of propaganda. It's been anti-Semitic propaganda. And these Arab countries like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have been courageous enough to come forward and say, it's not true, and we're signing a peace agreement, and we're normalizing relations with Israel, the Jewish state. So it's proving what's true and what's not.
One of the questions I want to maybe get to after the break, but since we're coming up to a break, we'll set that up for afterwards. The relationship, of course, between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, the whole significance of this accord, because I think it's going to not only provide diplomatic benefits, but economic benefits, and just even this idea that Donald Trump, as the president, did some things that were very radical from most people's point of view, even in America, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, as well as actually pulling out of the Iranian nuclear deal, the decision to take out one of the chief terrorist generals, if you will, of Iran. And if that's not enough, then even recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. So wanted to maybe get your comments about that, because after all, we are in an election year. And you can be as political or non-political as you would like, but I wanted to at least address that. And also just again to talk about the significance of this. As we said just the other day when I was reading a piece from one of these major newspapers, if this had been done by a previous administration, there would be headlines, there would be interviews with individuals asking how did this take place, what were some of the steps that led to this economic and diplomatic breakthrough, and all of that has happened since 1948. So if you've figured out there's 72 years there, okay, Jimmy Carter, Menachem Begin, Andrew Sadat, okay, I give you credit for that one. This is one of those on that level, but you wouldn't know it by watching the mainstream press. But we'll talk about it here on Point of View, and we'll continue that conversation right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Susan Markle with us for just a few more minutes, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. One of the things that is so striking to me, Susan, is that if you go to, for example, a Trump rally, even before this election, and you would ask people, what do you like about Donald Trump, don't like about it? It's amazing how many times people will say he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, to be honest, you go back and look at his campaign, it wasn't in the top 10, maybe even not in the top 20 issues, but I think it just resonated so much with the American people because they had seen, for example, Bill Clinton say that they were going to move the embassy and did not. They saw George W. Bush say they were going to move the embassy and they did not. They saw that Barack Obama said that they would move the embassy and they did not. They saw candidate Donald Trump say they would move the embassy and they did. And so last time I was in Jerusalem, I got my picture in front of the embassy because it's pretty significant. But you add that to Golan Heights and a variety of other issues, and now even pulling together this peace accord. This is pretty significant, and whether you like this president or not, those were very substantial and significant changes, and Benjamin Netanyahu certainly seems to appreciate that. But you are on the ground. Tell us what is actually being perceived because of some of those actions.
Well, there's no doubt about it, but President Trump has been the most pro-Israel president ever. And what he's done to support Israel and the moving of the U.S. Embassy in spite of extreme pressure against it. He had phone calls from all over the world. His own advisors were telling him not to. It would produce violence And, of course, there was no violence whatsoever. There was no reaction. And so, it was a major move, and we have appreciated so much. And, of course, he knows that support of Israel and moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem was a very key issue for the evangelical vote in America. And we actually conveyed that to his campaign before he was elected. He knew it was one of the top 5 issues for us regarding Israel. And so he stuck to his promises. He did promise it when he was campaigning, and unlike the others, he fulfilled his promise. And that's been a driving force in his administration. He believes very strongly in fulfilling his promises to the American people. And if he said he was going to do something, he's doing everything that he can to fulfill those promises. But, there's such pushback against him, and this is why I appreciate what you're doing in bringing this news, even of the Abraham Accord, to your audience, because it is a major accomplishment. And the media has been very quiet about it. They tried to play it down as much as they could. They tried to ignore it as much as they could because they knew that this made President Trump look good, and it made Prime Minister Netanyahu look good. And so they didn't even talk about it. But yet this is nothing short of a realignment of the entire Middle East. And it's a major step forward for peace in the Middle East and for peace for Israel in the Middle East. And so we're very, very thankful for Trump and what he did to make this happen.
Let's talk about how people can join with you. If we go again to the website, we have a link to your website, but at the very bottom there, you talk about a couple things. First of all, pray. To join the Isaiah 62 prayer initiative, I want you to describe that, to join, and then to give. So talk about how people can join with you, both in prayer and involvement and even in giving.
Yes, well, and I'd like to add a third option to that. This weekend, we're beginning our Feast of Tabernacles celebration.
Yes.
It is all online. So we invite everyone to go to icej.live and find out more about that. It's going to be an amazing event. Secondly, we do have our Isaiah 62 prayer initiative. Every month, we send out prayer points from Jerusalem. They go out all around the world. And Christians and churches all around the world are praying in agreement that month for these things for Israel, prayer points for the Arab world and the Middle East, and prayer points for our ministry and with the Jewish people. So we invite people on our website. They can find it. I believe the URL would be icejusa.org/Isaiah 62, but they can find it on our website. And third, yes, we invite them to donate, to be a blessing to Israel financially. And once again, icejusa.org. They can find a donate button right there, center forward. So
and that is
you.
a more difficult website to find, which is one of the reasons why we certainly encourage you. Just simply go to our website, pointofview.net,
Yes.
click on the picture of Susan Michael, and then you'll find it there. But let's again talk about the blog, because that's the link that we have right now. Can people subscribe to that blog? And are there various videos they can watch? And are there some ways that they can pass this on to their friends and neighbors?
Yes, we really invite them to take advantage of that blog. There's probably, I don't know how many articles in there on all kinds of subjects, biblical as well as current events. And so if they sign up for our email list, any of the sign-up buttons, they will begin to hear from me and be aware of any articles that I put out. We're also launching a new podcast and video channel on YouTube that'll be up October 13th. So if they will go to your website and click on that and then sign up for our emails, they'll be aware of all this new content that will be coming out.
I might just mention, too, just in passing, since, of course, you're going to be doing a lot of things online. You've posted in the past why pandemics are dangerous for Jewish people, the Passover and the coronavirus. Of course, now we have the Feast of Tabernacles and coronavirus. This has just been a very difficult time for what you're doing there in Israel, and really has been, if you will, somewhat dangerous time for Jewish people, hasn't it?
Well, it is because any pandemic is given over to a lot of conspiracy theories. People get fearful, and then they become angry, and they look for somebody to blame. And we've seen a lot of that under the coronavirus here in the United States. Unfortunately, there have been theories then passed about by some of the anti-Semites pointing the finger at Jews in general or Israelis. They were behind it. They were going to make money off of it. So that's why we want to highlight to be aware of these conspiracy theories. They're very dangerous for the Jewish people. Yeah. And but yes, it's been a difficult year. And in Israel, we've been very busy bringing aid to Holocaust survivors and the elderly that were shut in their homes. And we've actually been busier than ever. And just demonstrating Christian love and support to the people in Israel. And they've been so grateful for it.
Well, Susan, thank you so very much for educating us, and appreciate you joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, it's been great. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Again, we have one link that you can follow, and that will take you to the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, and that is available on our website. Also posted this article on how this Abraham Accord, or the Israel UAE Peace Accord, whatever you want to call it, actually is somewhat of a deadly blow to these anti-Semitic campaigns. And so I thought you would appreciate that particular article there as well. We are convinced that these are important issues for you to know about. We certainly encourage you to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and also take the time to find out a little bit more. We have links so that you can pray for Israel, that you can pray for this International Christian Embassy, and also where you can join up with them and even financially support them if you want to do so. So again, these are the things that we always provide here at Point of View. And as you go to the website, pointofview.net, you'll find everything that you need to get involved. And you've been listening to Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and I'm so grateful for you joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about voting. I voted yesterday. I don't know how many of you have already early voted, but I'm going to try to give you some of those numbers. Maybe even say what they think it might mean in terms of the presidential election, the senatorial elections, and all the rest. So we'll cover that in just a minute. Also, I think we now have pretty good evidence that mail-in voting hasn't worked in states that haven't done it before. And I love this piece that came out today with the Wall Street Journal saying, well, mail-in voting done better if you look at states that have been doing it for years and know how to do it correctly. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Then we'll get back to the confirmation hearings, because after all, there are some people trying to even explain why such a qualified nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, has been receiving so much flack. And of course, we know some of the arguments, but I think Ben Shapiro has a good piece on that. And the real question as to not whether we would have another coronavirus relief package, which is desperately needed. Just look what's going on in the airline industry right now. But whether or not the White House and Nancy Pelosi in particular, but the Congress in the House is too far apart. So we'll talk about those issues. And then later this hour, we're going to have in studio Angela Blair. She wrote a very good piece a while back on Netflix and Cuties. And I just always wanted to get her in studio. She does live in the Dallas area and actually works with Kyle on the whole issue of the American Sniper and those kinds of things, and the Chris Kyle Foundation, and also has been a broadcaster for many years, but nevertheless wrote a very good piece, and I thought it'd be good to get her in studio for you to meet her face-to-face, see her on camera, and maybe we'll use her maybe in the future, I hope, and maybe the Millennial Roundtable, some other things. Next hour, Otis Ledbetter will be with us. We'll talk about soul hunger, and then we'll get into a good conversation with Craig Denison. Jim Denison was on with us yesterday. This is his son, talking about not only their First 15 ministry, but it is National Suicide Awareness Month, and he has written a very good piece on the fact that sometimes when we have mental problems and then people in church ask us how we're doing, we say, oh, we're fine, and you feel like a hypocrite. So we'll get into that, and some of that ties in very well with my commentary today, which is on the subject of loneliness, a crisis of loneliness. So we're going to talk about a little bit of what is in the news in terms of voting, a little bit in terms of some of the other key issues, and then we'll finish off by talking about what this lockdown and the pandemic has done to us, and that will certainly cover the next 2 hours. Okay, as best as we can estimate right now, 13 million Americans have already cast their ballots. I'm one of those, and I'll be the first to admit that as nice as it is to be able to do that early, it is a little bit odd when you think about it, because some of you are in states where you have already been able to vote through a mail-in ballot, absentee ballots, or now in-person voting, because in the state of Texas where I live, it's been open for 3 weeks. So that's one of those issues. And it's sad because if you think about this, we have yet to see a second presidential debate. And there's a lot that can happen between now and November. They used to talk about an October surprise, but now when people are voting this early in October, there are some issues. Since we broadcast nationwide, I won't talk about all the states, but let me pick out a few. Those of you living in Florida, already 1.7 million Floridians have already voted. Let's go to California. So far, 1.1 million have already voted there. Those of you in Michigan and New Jersey probably will surpass the 1 million ballots cast by maybe tomorrow. So that is pretty significant. What does that mean? Well, it's hard to estimate because there's a lot more people that are voting early because of the pandemic. So you can't necessarily do a comparison to 2016. But almost everybody assumes that there will be more people voting this time than voted 4 years ago. How many voted 4 years ago? Well, I happen to have that number, 136,669,000, excuse me. And that will be surpassed, I think most people will assume. One of the things that people have said is, will we pass the 6% barrier? That is 6% of those people who are of voting age actually voting. I've never liked that statistic for one very good reason. When you compare the number of people to vote to all the people of voting age, you got a real problem because a lot of people of voting age are not eligible to vote. You know what I'm saying? They're not citizens of the United States. So that would be a better number. I'd rather they at least compare it to the number of people who voted who are registered to vote, because you at least would assume, at least you'd hope, people registered to vote actually qualify for being able to vote. But nevertheless, that is the case. So we had 136 million ballots cast. That's actually wrong, because we had 138 million ballots cast and 136 million voted for the presidency. And if you're doing your math real quickly, that means there were 2 million Americans 4 years ago that left the ballot blank for the presidential race. Are you? That's just amazing to me. So I'm going to go in and vote, but I'm going to skip over Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. That was 2 million people. If some of those voted either way for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, it would have changed things dramatically. So little footnote, trivia footnote, probably nobody but me cares about, but it was 138.8 million and 136.7 million. So really 2.1 million people went into the polling place 4 years ago and did not vote for either of the candidates or any of the other candidates for the presidency. That just gives you a little bit of an idea of what we were dealing with last time and maybe what we'll be dealing with again this time. There may be some people that will go, and frankly, I'm not necessarily against that. I've had some people say, look, I can't vote for either candidate. They said that 4 years ago. They certainly are saying that now. And I say, well, that doesn't mean you stay home. I'm sure you still have a Senate race. I mean, there are 35 U.S. Senate races, so that is certainly up for grabs. You have all sorts of races for the House of Representatives, 435. You have your state senator, your state representative. 13 of you are in states that have governor's races, and then all the way down to mayors and city council and everything else. So I'm not necessarily making fun of you if you said, I can't vote for the top of the ticket, but I want to vote for some of the others. I'm glad that you exercised your civic duty, but it is amazing. I had no idea that 2 million people went out to vote 4 years ago and did not vote for either of the candidates for presidency. Let's, if we can, get to something else real quickly, and that is we've always had people say, you know, we shouldn't be upset about mail-in voting because all these other states have been able to do so well. And I love what the editors of the Wall Street Journal said. What do they have the rest of us lacked? Well, for one thing, they check out their solid deadlines. For those of you in Colorado, you know that registered voters in Colorado are going to be mailed their ballot October 16th. That's this Friday. And a person who registered to vote within 8 days of the election won't be sent a ballot by mail, but must get one in person. But for our friends up there in Oregon, and I was just in Oregon about a week ago, that's really strict because guess what? If you want to vote and you are not registered, you are too late. That last date was yesterday. You have to actually be registered 21 days before the election in order for you to actually vote in November. And contrast that with what I've mentioned on this program many times before. We have federal judges, we have state judges in Arizona, Michigan, Georgia, especially in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, that have been changing the election rules. And some of these cases, including the one from Pennsylvania, it's going to have to go to the Supreme Court to try to reestablish some of those deadlines. So if you want to vote early, take a lesson from some of the states that have been doing it for years. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Nearly half of American adults report sometimes or always feeling lonely. That same study by Cigna also found that nearly the same percentage reported feelings of being left out. That is why they say loneliness is at epidemic levels. 25 years ago, I wrote a book, Signs of Warning, Signs of Hope, making a number of predictions for the future. Chapter 8 set forth the case for a coming crisis of loneliness. Years later, Philip Slater wrote about the pursuit of loneliness. The U.S. Census Bureau documented the increasing number of adults living alone. Dan Keeley talked about living together loneliness in one of his books. And Roberta Hestonese coined the term crowded loneliness. This trend was there for anyone to see if they began reading some of the sociological literature. Of course, lots of people have written about the crisis of loneliness since then. Robert Putnam wrote about it in his famous book, Bowling Alone. He argues that people need to be connected in order for our society to function effectively. Putnam concludes social capital makes us smarter, healthier, safer, richer, and better able to govern a just and stable democracy. In his book, Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal, Senator Ben Sasse laments that our traditional tribes and social connectedness are in collapse. All of this comes at a cost. Julianne Holt-Lundstedt has published research showing that people with weaker social ties had a 50% increased likelihood of dying earlier than those with stronger ones. Being disconnected, she says, is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The loneliness epidemic has arrived. Pastors and churches need to address this dangerous trend. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention about voting, and then we will certainly get into a couple of other issues. Bottom of the hour, we'll have Angela Blair with us as we talk about Netflix, Cuties, and a number of other things that are relevant. As I mentioned just a minute ago, there have been so many times in which people have expressed concern about mail-in voting, whether it's the president or a variety of others, the attorney general, you can go down the list. And the quick almost throwaway line has been, well, other states have been doing it for years with no problems. Yes, those states were doing it because of very firm deadlines, very tight, strict deadlines that don't move. They also learned some things about how to make sure that there weren't going to be the kind of glitches that I think are going to surface, especially as we see some of the attempts to change some of the rules and deadlines in places like Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And in just a minute, I might even mention, you tell me who wins Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I'll tell you who the next president is, because right now, those are all leaning Biden, and those were very important states that actually gave Donald Trump the Electoral College victory. And if you know that those three go to Donald Trump again, I think it's quite possible, unless he is not able to hold a couple of so-called swing states like Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, whatever, Iowa, Ohio, that he would win. But right now, if you just look at those states which are solidly Joe Biden, are leaning towards him, you can almost come up with 290 electoral votes. You only need 270 to win. And when you look at the United States Senate, again, you tell me who is going to win the senatorial races in North Carolina, Iowa, and Montana. I can probably tell you who controls the Senate. because I'm already assuming that maybe Republicans lose in Maine and Arizona, Republicans pick up in Alabama. We'll see where that goes. But the point is that you are starting to look at some of these swing states. But back to the point, the argument has always been, well, look at these states that have for some time not had problems, but they did have some very significant problems in places like Washington, Colorado, and others. But look at the deadlines, too. I mean, if you are in Oregon today listening to the broadcast and saying, oh, I need to register to vote, sorry, you're too late. You'll have to wait to 2024 to vote in the next presidential election. So that's already gone. And that's what it should be, because after all, we're talking about the U.S. Postal Service delivering your ballots. And when you're now starting to have some of these state judges and federal judges saying, oh, as long as it's postmarked by November 3rd, that's sufficient. Well, I think that sets that aside pretty quickly. Let me get to a couple other issues before we get into some of the guests that we'll be talking to today. And the first is, will we have another relief package? There is certainly a need for it. And last time we found that the federal government, both the House and the Senate, but I'm looking primarily at the House at the moment, were able to sort of place, at least in a few cases, work cross party lines to pass a historic economic relief package. But now that the so-called CARES Act has expired, then we need another bill. You would think that wouldn't be that difficult. The House Democrats have one proposal, which would be $2.2 trillion. That's with a T. That's $2,000 million, okay, if you can get the mental head around that. And interestingly enough, the White House has had a $1.8 trillion bill. Why can't we just split the difference? But you've had Nancy Pelosi walk away from it. You've had Donald Trump walk away from it. Matter of fact, he walked away from it, and then very shortly thereafter tweeted that he was still interested, and I was like, okay, that didn't help the negotiations. And so I think there's enough blame to go to both sides, but there is still a real need. And what has happened lately is some of the Republican senators, of course, we're talking about some of them running in these 35 Senate races, have actually opposed the spending for a couple of reasons, maybe one of which is pretty obvious. It's just going to vastly increase the deficit or those kinds of things, or that it would not necessarily be helpful in their district. So will we get another coronavirus relief package? The skeptical part of me says not a chance. The optimist says maybe, but time is starting to run out, and maybe it happens after the election one way or the other. But I thought it would be good to, for just a minute, to come back to one of the other issues that we have talked about here before and over the last couple of days, and that is these confirmation hearings. And if you think about this, the amount of comments thrown at Judge Amy Coney Barrett are oftentimes not necessarily even comments to her as her personality, because she's an impeccably credentialed individual, but about the whole process. It's too fast, or that this is paid for by black money, or that this should not happen when we're too close to an election. You know, all the kinds of arguments that Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought that the seat should be left open, you know, on and on. And I thought Ben Shapiro helped understand why this is indeed the case. And I'll just quote from his piece, because he says, conservatives seen the judiciary as Alexander Hamilton characterized in Federalist Paper number 78. Remember when I read that at the time, I even kind of rolled my eyes, because he at that time thought that the Senate would be significant, the House would be most significant, and the least significant branch of all would be the judiciary, which at that time, even when I was taking classes about that, was making all sorts of decisions on everything from affirmative action to abortion. Of course, now it's made decisions about marriage and everything else, because his argument is that it was simply going to be rendering a judgment. And he says conservatives kind of have had that view, that this should just be like an umpire, you know, safe or out, you know, it's constitutional, not constitutional. But he goes on to say that liberals see the court as a super legislature designed to act as moral arbiters on behalf of progressive values. That's why President Barack Obama stated that judges ought to be selected for their quality of empathy and understanding and identify people's hopes and struggles as an essential ingredient for arriving at just decisions and outcomes. And part of this also is the breakup of a very significant liberal bloc. I've said this before, but again, thank you, Ben Shapiro, for pulling this together. During the last Supreme Court term, out of the 67 decisions rendered, the 4 justices appointed by Democrats, in other words, the 4 liberal justices, voted together 51 times. The few exceptions, by the way, oftentimes were Stephen Breyer. But, okay, so when you walk in making a case before the Supreme Court, you already know that these 4 votes are all going to vote in lockstep. And to contrast that, Democrats, those liberals that were actually appointed by Democrat presidents, voted together 51 times. How many did the Republican appointees vote together? 37 times. And if nothing else, it was oftentimes referred to as the Ginsburg Four, the Ruth Ginsburg Four, because they always voted. And so together, and if you looked at some of these religious liberty cases, Kelly Shackelford could certainly speak to that issue, you just know walking in, you already have 4 votes against you. Your only hope is to get the other 4 conservatives who might agree with you on religious liberty and then wonder where, in the past, Anthony Kennedy was, now where John Roberts is, or where Neil Gorsuch is on those issues, because that's the way the game is played, and it's a sad game indeed. Let me also mention that I've posted a piece which we will not get to today, but it is worth reading. It's called The Republican Retreat on Race. Maybe we'll get to it later in the week. It's written by Mark Bauerlein, who's been on the program with us before, and he says that somewhat often Republicans retreat when the issue of race is brought up. And he uses one example where Senator Kamala Harris made a big point about the fact that there were no black appointments in the courts that have been put forward. And I think she was looking at the circuit court. Yeah, because she was looking at 50, because we certainly have more than that. And talked about how I think it would have been very good for the Vice President, Mike Pence, to have responded about the fact that judges come from the top levels of legal profession. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of African Americans in the top 10%. And maybe that gets back to what's happening in our poor school systems, oftentimes run by Democrats. In other words, don't play defense all the time. He's talking about playing offense, and then goes in and talks about similar conversations he's had in the university, where, again, individuals have been complaining they couldn't get enough minorities in graduate programs. And he says, have you ever served on a graduate admissions committee? Because I have. And I know how hard we work to try to get some of them in there. But it again goes back to some of the issues in the schools, breakdown of the family, and things we've talked about before. So if nothing else, I thought it was a very good piece, not only in terms of identifying a problem, but giving some possible solutions and even talking points. And so it's one of the articles we've posted today for you to read. And of course, when we come back, one of the other articles we've posted is by Angela Blair, Cuties, Should We Only Be Mad with Netflix? We'll talk about that with her in studio right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, and we are privileged to have in the studio Angela Blair. And the reason is that a number of months ago, actually just about a month ago, now that I look at it, she wrote a very good piece that we were talking about at the time in terms of Netflix and Cuties. And of course, so many of you have called in saying we canceled our subscription. And I thought, first of all, it was so well written that it would be good to talk about. Second of all, as I was reading through that, she's quoting from Sheriff Bill Wayburn, who's been on the program with us before. Matter of fact, I'm going to be in an event with him tonight. And I thought, I think she lives in Dallas, and looked it up, and there she does. So I thought this would be great to get her in studio, introduce you to her, see if maybe she can join us on some of the radio programs in the future. Angela is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin. She has worked in the sports area, university with Fox Sports, CBS College Sports, to mention just a few. She has been an on-air reporter and host with the Christian Broadcasting Network, and more recently has worked with Morgan Freeman and National Geographic on the story of God. But one of the other connections, which I thought was really good, is that she works closely with Taya Kyle, the Chris Kyle Foundation, and I guess that's one of your business partners. And so it's just great to have you in studio.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm hoping that we can do more with you. We do have a Millennial Roundtable, and I think you would be great to join that. And some of the other things that you've been writing about are very helpful. One of the problems, Angela, had back when the Cuties documentary came out, or the movie, whatever you want to call it, there were a lot of us that didn't see it. And I've said before, I've got an article here and a booklet on drug abuse. I've never done drugs, but you don't have to take drugs to know that there's something wrong with certain kinds of drugs. Same thing. I didn't need to go watch Netflix to watch this movie, but you did. And if nothing else, I love the way you wrote about this, because first of all, you came in expecting to be rather turned off by the movie, but you really also helped us understand what exactly was taking place and why this was such a controversy. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I started seeing cancel Netflix trending, and I did watch the trailer, and most people were saying, I'm not even going to watch this. But I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to take my Friday night and watch this film. And I'm really glad I did. Obviously, it was disturbing, but I think it was important, if I was going to write about this, to actually watch the full picture. So the trailer does not do it justice, which I wrote in this article. There was truly so many scenes throughout this film where it was zoomed in on the young girls' areas, if you will, or, even nudity. And with my background working in media, I couldn't help but think, through watching this whole film, how on earth, when you're filming a major production, there's set, there's crew, there's casting, there's directors, how everyone's sitting on set, and even the parents were watching this being filmed thinking, wow, this is great content, this is awesome, and not have any flags raised. And to me, that was one of the most disturbing things. And I think that I titled this article, "Should We Only Be Mad with Netflix?" And the reason why I say that is because I think if we look at media today through Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Netflix, what sells? Sex, right? And sensationalism through media, the bar is getting raised higher and higher, and we're seeing more things. In the UK, they just had the first television show with male genitalia shown, excuse my language, but erect on just plain TV. And the viewers were sitting there thinking, what just happened?
Yeah, what just...
So I think it's more of a question of what's going on with media today, and why are there not more boundaries around things that are being put out for public consumption.
And again, you later on do say that I applaud the director trying to show the challenges young girls face, but you could have done that in ways that would leave it to your imagination but not confront you. And the argument from Netflix is, well, it's an award-winning film and a powerful story about the pressure young girls face on social media. And I won't, of course, say on air some of the things in your article, but it goes on for 3 pages. We have it on our website, pointofview.net. It came out a while back in Townhall, so you can find it there. But what you will find is that, as you said, anybody that watched the trailer, and I think some of us did watch parts of the trailer, you watched the film and said the film is much worse than the trailer, which usually the trailers are some of the most provocative elements. But I won't go into all these scenes in the laundry room and what's being done there and the reaction of some of these judges. But this is a pedophile's dream, isn't it?
It is. So I did talk to Sheriff Bill Wayborn, who is actively, constantly involved with sex trafficking rescue missions. And he told me that the scenes from this is a pedophile's dream. It normalizes in your mind, oh, this is normal. And the film makes these young girls seem it's attractive, and there's older men, much older saying, ooh, like in different scenes. And so it's truly placing those thoughts that it's okay to think that way. And that's why this is such a big deal. And it's really a shame that Netflix is not coming forward and recognizing just the huge issue of trafficking today and how this can contribute to it. They removed a show a couple years ago where a lot of people didn't like the series because it was violent. It was around zombies. Netflix removed that. Why are they not removing this? And so I think it's a really unfortunate situation because they have such a power to put out important, positive, impactful content, not things like this.
One of the lines that you use in here is one that I could even see my wife saying, because you're talking about what this 11-year girl does. Again, you can't even say, and I wouldn't dare say on radio, what were the girls doing, okay? But she's finding something on the ground, she's doing this, and you said, wouldn't you, if you saw that, want to rush to her rescue? I mean, if you are a mom and you saw an 11-year-old that isn't even yours, and you saw her doing that, wouldn't you just want to rush and say, wait a minute, honey, let me see if we can change this. Let me throw that away. Let's not do that. That's just not helpful. Even in a culture where sometimes we say, well, it's none of my business what they do over there in their family. Some of this is so appalling, so uncomfortable that and I loved how you put that. Wouldn't you, instead of just looking at it going, wow, I can't believe that's on the screen, you'd just be going, honey, we got to save you from this because we don't want you to go down the wrong road. And so I thought that was something that was really powerful about the way you wrote this.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was interesting because obviously these girls are in character, but I actually checked out their personal social media profiles where they dressed very similarly in their everyday life. And I can't help but my heart just goes out to those girls. I hope that they didn't go through this experience and think, oh, this is okay for me to dress. It was just very, very provocative. And, you know, aside from this article, I have a huge heart for speaking to younger girls. Yes. I have a really awesome God story. I just got married 3 months ago. I actually waited for marriage, and my husband did as well. He was in the MLB, and we both have waited. And I'm just looking at our hookup culture we see today and how it's girls now 11 to 13 years old that are starting to lose their virginity. And I really think this is a conversation that believers today need to stand on the front lines and really be a voice against what this is, because truly it's so against God's design for us. We are made for the family unit, marriage, and films like this just put the word out there or thoughts in people's minds that it is okay to be involved with the hookup culture. And it truly is damaging mentally and physically. And I really have a heart for standing against that.
You know, one of the things that I do right now is I've been on a couple of boards, actually 2 different ones, that actually go into the schools and they talk about abstinence, they talk about bullying, they talk about sexting, they talk about drugs and those kinds of things. And I just couldn't help but wonder that all the good that we're trying to do in the public school system and also in the Christian schools that invite us in as well, this could be completely obliterated with just one movie like this that simply says it's no different. So that's in some respects exactly what you were writing about.
Well, I've got a little insider info. This is the first time I've said this publicly, but I am excited to say that I'm working on a documentary right now. It is going to be a game changer. It's going to be called Sex, All Strings Attached, mixing celebrity interviews with educational interviews from leading experts today to really prove that the hookup culture is damaging and not God's design for us. And I really am praying that it's going to be an impactful tool to reach youth today and show them that there's such a better way.
Well, again, you know, we want to have you back on that one for sure. And we'll do what we can to promote it. Let's come back from the break, though, because there's some other aspects. You talk about one of the founders from the Exodus Road, which is actually a nonprofit organization rescuing boys and girls on the issue of sexual trafficking. And Angela, one of the things we've done quite often is we've done various specials. Matter of fact, we have our Outlook magazine about a couple months ago on sexual trafficking. And that's one of those issues where at least you can get some agreement. On almost every other issue we talk about on Point of View, you got the left and you got the right, you got the Republicans, you got the Democrats. I don't see anybody on the other side of sexual trafficking except the traffickers. You know, that's one place where Republicans, Democrats, liberals, and conservatives say sexual trafficking is wrong. And I want to try to connect this to that as well. And if nothing else, talk a little bit more about that upcoming documentary and some of the other things that we are getting into. So we need to take one of those mandatory breaks. Angela Blair with us. And if you would like to read this piece, we have it on our website, pointofview.net. Print it out. pass it around, and if nothing else, it will confirm your desire to cancel Netflix. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again for a few more minutes, and we are privileged to have in studio with us today Angela Blair. I got a feeling we're going to hear from her a lot more, especially with her documentary. But what about this? You know, one of the quotes you have in here is from the founder of the Exodus Road, in which you said, "Children are the most vulnerable population we have. It is our job as a society and community to protect our children." And I would agree, and goes on to say the film violates that in many ways. I think of all the good we've tried to do by warning kids about the dangers of being sexually involved, the dangers that can come from a hookup culture, sexually transmitted diseases, a higher suicide rate, emotional baggage, and all the rest. And then we have this particular movie that sexualizes young children. What about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, again, as Sheriff Bill Wayborn said, that this movie really is a pedophile's dream. It's almost like an appetizer for them, right? And really just can serve as a trigger. I got to speak to the founder of the Exodus Road, where he told me, I've been in the craziest scenarios in all parts of the world. And when you meet these people that are running pedophile rings, essentially, and trafficking rings, which actually said there's a lot of women, so madams, he said, as a believer, you meet them and you just see the brokenness in their life, and your heart just melts because they're not this like big bad. It's not always like that. It's just very broken people and really acting out from childhood wounds. And so I think that, he had said movies like this really just, they do not help just the forefront of this major issue. And he said, I think it's interesting. There's all these conspiracies like Pizzagate and Wayfair and things like that with trafficking. But he said, truly, it is in front of all of us in every city. DFW, where we both are, is actually one of the highest places of trafficking. It's one of the crossroads of America. Yeah. It's central. There's a lot that goes on here as far as manufacturing and transportation. But he said, yes, there can be conspiracies you follow, but it truly is just in cities. And the best thing we can all do is have our eyes and ears out. If you see a young girl with an older gentleman or woman and it just doesn't look right, there's nothing wrong with saying something. Or if you are talking about it with your group of friends, just raising awareness is something that all of us can do, he said. One
of the articles there, the founder said, we recently rescued a girl being sold on Twitter. I can't even get my head around some of that as well. And when we talk about slavery, everybody says that's in the past. I said, no, we still have a slave trade around the world. Of course, there have been some movies like Taken and others that sort of imply that. But one of the things that I remember when we first started talking about sexual trafficking, that's 3 studios before that. So this goes back decades. I actually had people calling in, Angela, saying, this cannot be happening here in this area of the country or anywhere in the country, because if it was, the mainstream media would cover it. And I was saying, well, just because the mainstream media doesn't cover it doesn't mean it isn't happening. Right. Finally, the mainstream media said, wait a minute, this is a topic we should address. This isn't some kind of conspiracy theory. This really is happening. There are people in police units and in law enforcement actually trying to break up these rings. Right. And as a result, I think we've come to a point where people recognize it's a problem. But then, nevertheless, we have Netflix saying, well, we're trying to call people's attention to this particular problem. And my argument, Angela, see if you would agree, was, okay, I would be glad that if you did a documentary talking about the problem of prostitution, you would talk about it. You would interview the women before that were engaged in it, but you wouldn't show prostitutes in the process, right? And the problem with the argument come from Netflix is, well, we're just trying to address a really important story, and we do it in such a provocative way that I think you lose your credibility, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a line, and it was crossed. Yes. You can show in a cinematic way, but you don't need to do 5 to 10 seconds on their, we know different parts of their body, or zoom in. And, even just through the language, it was really, I don't even have friends that talk like that. And these are young girls just cursing, terrible language. And again, I just kept thinking of how are these children protected on set? They were completely used just for this agenda. And I really, it's just, again, we're all agreeing here that it wasn't right. But what's really disappointing is Netflix's response and lack of consideration for how that did expose all these girls on set.
Well, again, I have that article that is available on our website, pointofview.net. I would be remiss, since we have so many people that listen to this program in the military, if we didn't talk for just a few minutes about Chris Kyle Foundation. And you and Taya Kyle have been very much involved in this, and I just think the world of what she does, and now meeting you, this is a twofer, because you both really have a real heart to address some of those issues, to help really service spouses and the rest. Talk about some of the things you're doing.
Well, Taya Kyle is one of the strongest women I've ever met. She obviously endured a very hard thing. American Sniper portrayed her story very well. Her husband, Chris, was murdered, and out of losing her marriage, she wanted to help others. So she started the Chris Kyle Foundation. She really experienced how hard that military lifestyle was on their marriage and wanted to provide tools to other service couples. And what she found when she started that was it also had a lot of similarities with law enforcement families and police families. And right now we're seeing a lot of hatred, unfortunately, for the police community. And we strongly stand behind our law enforcement. And Taya always talks about, we always hear about PTSD and 22 soldiers a day. A lot of those suicides and stats, it's tragic that it's also going into the spouses, or the children are also having hardships. But most of those they're finding are relationship based. when their marriage is not strong, and I think that's for any of us, right? Because life is a battle for all of us outside the home. But if we can have a safe place to run to, and so we came up with 4 different programs. It's incredible. We work with different military couples and police couples around the country. We just worked with Baylor University to come out with a program called Mastering Your Marriage. So it's a special curriculum created for couples around that service lifestyle, around the deployment, all the unknowns. And to be honest, I think all of us have had a little taste of what that life feels like with uncertainty, plans changing, things shut down, or, and that's something that they have to deal with. And one of the things she says they encourage military and police wives to do is really limit your time watching the news, because that can be just really triggers anxiety and fear. And so what a year to work with her, given what's going on in our culture today. But we really, I feel so thankful to work with her every day and really help that community, because they serve us and they deserve that.
Well, again, we always want to salute those of you in the military and in law enforcement. Matter of fact, next hour we're going to talk briefly about this book, Soul Hunger, which is something that connects up to that. And then we'll also be talking with another guest that will be talking about the fact that it is actually National Suicide Awareness Month. So we'll get into some of those issues as well. But if nothing else, Angela, it was great to meet you face to face. Great to have you in studio. I would like to have you back here again.
Thank you. And Tay and I, just one more thing. We just had a really cool lifestyle jewelry brand launch. It's called warriorcollections.com.
We have that link. Yes.
Yes. So our mission is to awaken the warrior within. It's a family brand. We even have little pet collar tags for your dogs. Like the one I love is play hard, nap harder. But we really want to just encourage families to be warriors together and to remember that this life is a temporary mission and God's with us.
And if you click on your picture, it'll take you to Warrior Collections, and I'm seeing some of the dog tags and everything right there. So we have it on the website, and that's another way that people can get involved. Thanks for joining us. I look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, first of all, we'll talk with Dr. Otis Ledbetter about the book which he has come out called Soul Hunger. And then we'll also, a little bit later, talk with Craig Denison. His father, Jim Denison, was on last night. We'll be talking about the National Suicide Awareness Month, and we've got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time, first of all, talking about a new book called Soul Hunger. Then we're going to get into a couple of other issues in the later part of this hour. It is National Suicide Awareness Month. And even my commentary today, my Viewpoints commentaries on the crisis of loneliness. So all of this sort of comes together this hour. And if you think about this, at birth, almost each one of us have these God-given hungers. And then we obviously try to actually fulfill those. And there's certainly a righteous prescription for soul hunger, but there's also an unrighteous resolution to that. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about this first half hour with Dr. Otis Ledbetter. He is an author and speaker and the lead pastor at Sonrise Church of Clovis, California, which is right there by Fresno. Holds a Doctor of Ministry degree from Liberty University, and also is the author of another book you might want to look up, Your Heritage, How to Be Intentional About the Legacy You Leave. And as we talk about this idea of soul hunger, I might just mention there's even what's called a hunger test, hungertest.com. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But first of all, Dr. Ledbetter, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, it's my pleasure, Kerby. Thank you for having me.
About 160 pages in this book with some great material that would be useful for any of our listeners out here that maybe are pastors, Sunday school teachers, small group leaders, and even have some material in the back where you can have some fill in the blanks and a number of other things. So let me commend it to all of our listeners as a way to address these crucial issues. And the way you've put it together is really look at just 9 of those hungers that in some respects, if we go the righteous way, can be found in the fruit of the Spirit. And of course, if we go in the unrighteous way, go to the works of the flesh. So for anybody that finds themselves wanting to teach through Galatians 5:22 and 23, this book is key because it puts this together in a way I'd never seen before. So if nothing else, give us a little bit of overview of the book, because in that respect, that is really the structure on which those 9 particular hungers all hang upon, isn't it?
It really is. And I've read this passage of Scripture like a lot of believers who go through the Bible for years and years. I've read it, and God opened the eyes of my heart. Actually, after being stuck, coming across 2 lists: the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit, found in the same chapter, and they seem to have nothing to do with each other. As a matter of fact, I called some of my friends, even some of my seminary professors, and asked them what the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit have in common, and they said absolutely nothing. I talked to some counselors at some seminaries and asked them the same thing, and the answer was the same, absolutely nothing. And I couldn't take that, because here they are side by side in the same passage of Scripture, and it says the Spirit wars against the flesh, and it doesn't say, it wrestles against the flesh. It says it wars. It wars against the flesh wars against the Spirit. So what are they warring over? Are they warring over my soul? No, that's settled, so that's not it. So where is the common ground? What are they warring over? Because you don't war over something that doesn't matter to you. You don't war over territory you don't want. And so both the flesh and the Spirit are warring over the territory. I think ground zero is where we find those hungers. And I put up on my office wall on the left side, I put big Post-it notes with the works of the flesh, and I use the New King James Version just to go in a straight line. And on the right side of my office wall, I put the fruit of the Spirit. And honestly, Kerby, I came in months, and I would pray, God, what do these have in common? There's something here that I haven't seen before. That's when he opened the eyes of my heart for the first time. Of course, I'm not saying it was new revelation, but for me, it just lay there for years undiscovered.
Yes.
And the issues that moved me to go deeper into the scripture were because so many people had said to me, the pastor, I read the Bible and I pray and I give and I attend church regularly, but for some reason, beyond their understanding, they're still just spiritually stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And the deepest longing of their heart to walk every day in the Spirit had escaped them. So what was this war over? And I struggled with it, and it sort of haunted me that I couldn't find it. And then that third list just began to materialize.
Right.
And I saw what they were warring over. They're warring over the same territory.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same territory. I saw the first the first fruit of the Spirit was love. And on the other side, the first two works of the flesh were adultery and fornication, what we would call making love. And the generation that's here now, they don't see that adultery and fornication, they actually don't see those as negative terms. They see those as that's what they are. I've had kids talk to me and say, that's negative, that's a negative term. And I say, yes, it is. But they just don't see it that way. And I believe this is where many of our fellow Americans are. They're stuck outside of that spirit walk.
Yes.
And
let me just mention real quickly, for those of you online especially, I'm holding up his soul hunger chart. And in some respects, I think the chart works as well as what's in the book, because you take each one of those. Let's take that one, intimacy. The positive is love. The negative, adultery and fornication. The next one, happiness. The positive is joy. The negative is uncleanness, licentiousness. And so you go through love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, or temperance. And you have each one of those hungers, and you can either fulfill it in a God-pleasing way, and that would be the fruit of the Spirit, and that's where you're ascending to the fruit of the Spirit, or the other is you can descend into the works of the flesh. And to me, that was the light bulb moment, the epiphany, if you will, whatever word you want to use, of your book, to say, yes, these are connected, and they're connected to these 9 particular hungers, soul hungers that people have. And so let me take a break, because we have one of those mandatory breaks come up. I don't want to cut you off, so we'll talk about that after the break, because then it helps you understand the structure of Galatians 5, but it also gives you sort of marching orders on, okay, what can I do in order to turn some of this around? Because like you said, Dr. Ledbetter, so many people just find themselves stuck in this situation, and so we want to talk about that as well. But again, if you're interested in this book, we have information about it on the website, pointofview.net. You can click on the picture of the book, and it is available both in paperback and Kindle. It's a very inexpensive book, so I would highly recommend it to you. But as you go to the back of the book, you'll notice that there are all sorts of scripture verses, questions, places where you can fill in the blank. If you're maybe a small group leader or a Bible fellowship leader or somebody like that, and you've been looking for something to maybe help people begin to develop the works, the fruit of the Spirit, and to fight off the works of the flesh, this might be a really significant book for you to get. So when we come back, we're going to talk about how this soul hunger chart and how the fruit of the Spirit and the works of the flesh connect up, and how we can help your spiritual growth. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Nearly half of American adults report sometimes or always feeling lonely. That same study by Cigna also found that nearly the same percentage reported feelings of being left out. That is why they say loneliness is at epidemic levels. 25 years ago, I wrote a book, Signs of Warning, Signs of Hope, making a number of predictions for the future. Chapter 8 set forth the case for a coming crisis of loneliness. Years later, Philip Slater wrote about the pursuit of loneliness. The U.S. Census Bureau documented the increasing number of adults living alone. Dan Keeley talked about living together loneliness in one of his books. And Roberta Hestonese coined the term crowded loneliness. This trend was there for anyone to see if they began reading some of the sociological literature. Of course, lots of people have written about the crisis of loneliness since then. Robert Putnam wrote about it in his famous book, Bowling Alone. He argues that people need to be connected in order for our society to function effectively. Putnam concludes social capital makes us smarter, healthier, safer, richer, and better able to govern a just and stable democracy. In his book, Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal, Senator Ben Sasse laments that our traditional tribes and social connectedness are in collapse. All of this comes at a cost. Julianne Holt-Lundstedt has published research showing that people with weaker social ties had a 50% increased likelihood of dying earlier than those with stronger ones. Being disconnected, she says, is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The loneliness epidemic has arrived. Pastors and churches need to address this dangerous trend. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again with Dr. Otis Ledbetter, who again is an author, speaker, and lead pastor at Sonrise Church in Clovis, California, author of the book Soul Hunger. 11 chapters, the first kind of introductory chapter, then 9 chapters dealing with the various hungers: intimacy, happiness, contentment, justice, control, respect, truth, achievement, and pleasure. And then a final chapter. And if you would like to take the hunger test, we have a link to that as well, hungertest.com. And we have some of that information on the website. But Dr. Ledbetter, talk about this, because first of all, this was, I think, a great insight in seeing the connection between the fruit of the Spirit and the works of the flesh. But then you go on to say that this is very helpful in terms of helping people, if you will, get unstuck in their Christian life. How so?
You know, respectfully, it has crossed my mind, and I say that respectfully to those who have suffered it, but that many Christians in this current circumstance have suffered what I consider to be a spiritual stroke. Their spirit walk is just not as good as it used to be. It has our current spiritual darkness and divisions been caused by this worldwide pandemic, and now that we're in, I wonder, are things that happen, and or just has it just revealed how far we've strayed from our biblical moorings? And that's what I saw in my congregation. And there's so much hate in our world, and there's so much polarization, brother against brother, friend against friend, parent against child, child against parent. You know, families virtually being ripped apart in this present darkness. And although I began writing this book really over a decade ago, it strikes me that it was meant for this time where we find ourselves, and all those hungers that we're trying to satisfy. And, you know, one only has to be observant just a moment just to realize that. And we allow the darkness to get darker while we pursue satisfying our appetites. And you mentioned the hunger chart book. When people have this chart in their hand, I challenge them to tell me if you really see anybody in the media that's clamoring for the fruit of the Spirit to satisfy the hunger that we have. Mostly we see a rush toward the works of the flesh. And, you know, Kerby, I think that pursuit has its fingers on the dimmer switch, and the light in this great country, America, this once shining city on a hill, is shining less and less, getting darker and darker, because we're choosing the works of the flesh instead of the fruit of the Spirit to bring light into this world. And each time people run to the works of the flesh to satisfy their human hungers, they're choosing darkness over light. And as a pastor, I could see this, and I counsel a lot. I use this book and this chart now a lot to counsel. And to see the eyes of people light up and a light turn on, you know, in their mind, they see that they're causing their own difficulty. They're causing their own problems by the choices they're making to satisfy these hungers that they have. If a person can find their dominant hunger, and that dominant hunger might change, and I could give you times when it was for people sitting in my office. A person who suffered a divorce probably is hungering for intimacy right now, for connection. They're just a disconnected soul, and they need connection. They're hungering for intimacy. It might be that. They might hunger for control if they're going through a divorce at this time. So your dominant hunger may change, and that's why the hunger test was so important. And I designed that with the help of some technology experts. I designed that so a person could know where the battle is, because if the enemy doesn't have a face, they're almost impossible to defeat. And so I think finding out your own hunger puts a face on it, seeing really where you should go, the fruit of the Spirit or the work of the flesh, then gives you an answer, and that's hope. And that's what I want people to have, is hope that they can actually walk in the Spirit.
Let's, if we can, too, talk about, we do have a link to Hunger Test. At the moment, doesn't have the word Hunger Test there, but if you click around on the picture right beneath you, it will take you there. But in your book, you, of course, have some of the questions. What number describes what you most want out of life? Which number is the most important to you in difficult situations? Which number motivates you the best? A series of pretty simple questions that people can work their way through if they have the book, or simply can do so online. But by the time you answer about 24 plus questions, you have a much better idea of your vulnerability. And I think that there are different gifts and different callings for individuals. Also believe that there are different hungers and different temptations. You and I could walk through a number of different temptations in the world, and some might affect you more than me, and others based on your family background, given your vulnerability and all the rest. And so in some respects, you're providing a way for somebody to begin to understand what is, if you will, the go-to way in which Satan manipulates me. What is the way in which the world manipulates me? Because, again, in Galatians, it talks about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. So some of it could be due to satanic attacks. Some of it could be due to just various kinds of temptations. But this is why I think your book is so helpful. And really the first step is to go to that hunger test, don't you think?
Oh, I do. I do believe that. That's putting a face on what is ailing you. And when you do that, then now you have a way to fight it. And, you know, Paul, in writing to the Galatians, mentioned this, and also when Paul was writing to the Romans, what I want people to understand is, if you look at your hunger, you know, you're descending into the works of the flesh, adultery and fornication, ascending into the fruit of the Spirit, love. It's not an immediate accomplishment. You don't, in other words, just because you're craving intimacy doesn't mean in your Christian life you'll jump right into something as dark as adultery and fornication. There are steps down the path that will ultimately lead you there, and that's where you're headed if you don't turn around. and also agape love. To build a relationship with God, it takes time, and it takes reading your Bible. It takes spending time in prayer with Him and getting that deep relationship with God. These aren't instant. And so Paul said to the Christians, and when he saw them descending into darkness, he has the vortex of the downward vortex in Romans 1, where he says, you're unhonorable, you're ungodly, you're unthankful, you're unthoughtful, you're unwise. And I see that as the lust of the flesh. That leads you down into those first three, the lust of which on the chart you can see that represents the lust of the flesh. And then what represents the lust of the eyes, I see that as unclean, untruthful, unnatural, unknowing, unrighteous, found there in Romans 1. And then the pride of life, I see that in Romans 1 as undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, and unmerciful. That now somebody says, well, how do I go the other direction? That's descending. How do I ascend into the fruit of the Spirit? Just take the prefix un off of it. So if it's unhonorable and ungodly and unthankful, then it'd be wise, thoughtful, thankful, godly, and honorable. And if the un takes you down, then taking the un off of it is the opposite of where you're headed and would give you a 180 and allow you to move into the fruit of the Spirit.
So again, just before I let you go, let's talk about the fact that we have your picture there. We have a link to the website. We, of course, have the hunger test, and then we also have the book, Soul Hunger. And again, it's available both in paperback or Kindle, or they can contact you directly. But I suspect, Dr. Ledbetter, we're probably going to have a few people who are going to say, I would really like to teach that in my church, and I can get the book, but do you have other resources, or can they contact you? And we've got a contact information so that maybe they can learn from how you've been teaching it, so they can teach it in their Sunday school class or their church. So you have that opportunity there as well, don't you?
Yes, we do. New Hope Publishers is the publisher of this book, and if you go to their site, New Hope Publishers, under my name, they have an entire video series where I've spoken on it, and they have an entire Bible study series for anybody that wants it.
So again, great resources and all of that. This is, of course, National Suicide Awareness Month. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk with Craig Denison about a very good article he wrote in Christian Post. And, of course, my article today about loneliness. As a lot of our authors have said, whether it is Max Lucado or in this case, Dr. Otis Ledbetter, they wrote this for any time, but it has been so relevant, especially in our time with the pandemic and the lockdown. So, Dr. Ledbetter, thank you for joining us. I look forward to the next opportunity.
Such a pleasure. Thank you, Kerby.
We'll talk with Craig Denison next. He is the son of Jim Denison, who was on with us yesterday. So it's turning into the Denison Radio Network. But it'll be a really interesting conversation with him as well, as he shares panic attacks and also shares about the First 15 ministry. So we got a lot more to cover. We will do so right after this.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
You know, remember yesterday we had Jim Denison on the program, and one of the most outstanding families I've ever run into is the entire Denison family. And as we mentioned yesterday, in addition to having Jim Denison yesterday on the program, today we have Craig Denison on the program, his son. He is the author of First 15, and if you go to first15.org, which we have a link on the website, you can find out a lot more about this daily devotional guide, which is being provided to over 1 million believers, really providing them with a fresh experience with God's presence every single day. And Craig Denison writes and speaks, and he and his wife Rachel lead worship, and has been involved in another very significant aspect of ministry as well that ties into the conversation we just had a minute ago with Dr. Otis Ledbetter about his book, Soul Hunger. That is, in September, it was the National Suicide Awareness Month. We're going to carry that over here into the month of October as well. And really the theme that we want to talk about here is it really is okay with not being okay. So first of all, Craig Denison, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, thanks for those kind words, and thanks for having me. It really is a privilege to be here with you.
Just an incredible family, and certainly I appreciate what you have done, not only in your devotional issues, but you become kind of an expert on social media and all sorts of other things. But what I think we want to focus some time and attention on is this very powerful piece that we have posted on our website, in addition to the link to first15.org, in which you wrote, "I'm a Christian author, and I keep having panic attacks." And you pointed out that you sort of feel like a hypocrite, and I know we all do, because lots of times when somebody says, "How you doing?" it's sometimes just easier to say, "Doing great, doing fine, we're okay," because I don't even want to start into a 20-minute conversation because I'm just trying to get into church, trying to get into my work, whatever. But what you were pointing out is this idea that still lingers in the society and even in the church, where when people ask you how you're doing, you just sort of wonder, can I really tell them what's going on? And will the church even be willing to honestly and biblically respond to some of the emotional needs that I might be having right at that particular moment? Talk about that, if you might.
Yeah, I've grown up as a Christian for most of my life, and thanks for referencing that panic attack article as well. I mean, to make matters worse, I write this daily devotional, and I think almost every day I talk about this invitation God makes to us to find peace that's not related to our circumstances, but is a higher promise and is actually offered to us in the midst of our circumstances, Philippians said. I talk about that idea almost every day in this daily devotional. And then, I had 5 panic attacks in a row across just a handful of months when the pandemic hit. And a lot of soul searching has gone into that experience for me on the other side. And God has done a lot of amazing things, as he always does, to redeem those experiences. But what was interesting about writing that article and then having opportunities to speak with people like you, Kerby, is the most refreshing thing that people pointed out about the article I wrote wasn't necessarily any comments on the availability of God's peace. It was mostly just that, I, as some form of Christian leader, would simply say, "I'm struggling right now." And that people found that to be somehow more refreshing, or invited them into an opportunity to think more honestly about their lived experience as well, an experience of this pandemic and the other multifaceted crisis we're living in this year. And so to me, reflecting on why can't we simply be vulnerable as Christians with one another when God has made it so clear that what he wants from us is honesty. What he cares about is that we would simply be truly after his heart and would open ourselves fully to allow him to come and do his deepest work in us, and the value of Christian community and that redemptive work. Why is it that we stay so surface level with one another and wondering whether or not that is actually contributing to some of our experiences in life, and that we feel this need to be perfect? We feel the need to necessarily have all of the answers for everyone all the time. And there's little space that we create to acknowledge that we're not perfect and we don't always have all the answers. And in honesty, maybe there's an opportunity and in vulnerability for God to meet us and to meet us as a community and to actually use us for the advancement of his kingdom.
I think it might have been an encouragement to people, too, because you did mention the fact that you have written a book called Peace, Finding Rest in a Stressed Out World. So here is an individual that has written a book on finding peace based on Philippians 4, and he's stressed out as well. So as you said, there is an opportunity to actually provide vulnerability from a position of leadership. It would be like Chuck Swindoll saying, sometimes I have doubts, or Max Lucado, who wrote a book recently on anxiety or one on loneliness, saying, sometimes I'm anxious. Sometimes I feel lonely. Matter of fact, my commentary today is on the crisis of loneliness. So in some respects, we sort of expect the average person in the pew to maybe have some struggles, but we don't expect those of you that are very articulate, well-studied, really educationally profound types of individuals having those. And when you do, it provides freedom for everybody else to share their struggles, right?
I think so. I mean, if God has called us to leadership, I believe he's called me to leadership in some form. I mean, there's such an immense opportunity. What if one of the most profound areas of leadership I could provide is in vulnerability and authenticity? What if, as well as adding, some leadership as it relates to the invitation to vibrant connection and relationship with God, or as you mentioned, leadership to Denison Ministries and how that plays in terms of organizational development and strategy and decision making and all those various aspects of what we do as an organization. Like, what if the thing I cared most about was that I lead in being a whole and healthy person, and I lead in being a vulnerable individual to invite vulnerability from others. And in my communication, I did that. And in that, I provide an invitation where God says that when we are weak, he is strong. And I think what he's meaning by that is acknowledging that we're always weak, but can we acknowledge that weakness? Can we be poor in spirit? Can we practice humility? And in doing so in a way that's more conscious, and doing it so in a way that's more publicly stated, invite more of God's power into our life, more of God's power into our communities, allow God to work in more profound and even conscious ways as more conscious around our weakness, to do things that only he can do. And it's, I think what the world needs is not stories of our perfection, of stories how we got everything right. They need stories of how God actually met us in our imperfection and used that imperfection and redeemed it and led us to a place of health and a sense of thriving that we could never have accomplished on our own. That's what's interesting and exciting and what the world needs. They don't need more people that have the right answers. They need a God that has the right answers. How can we point to him in our vulnerability and authenticity?
Let's help our listeners for just a minute. Some people might say, I'm not really sure what a panic attack is. We've talked about this in the past, and I had one happen to me a while back, and I wouldn't have even known what it was if we hadn't talked about it on the air. And I guess everybody's is different, but my heart was racing real quickly, and all of a sudden I felt faint. But you had a series of those. So talk about what happened to you, and then how could your wife Rachel, or how could others around you or somebody else who's having a panic attack perhaps help them out? Can you give us some guidance and direction there?
Oh, thanks for asking that question. It's become a real source of encouragement for me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak into that. So, yeah, as you said, loneliness, I would add stress to that, has been an epidemic long before the pandemic hit our nation or our world this year and last year. When you look at studies, as a study that polled hundreds of thousands of employees across all the major continents in the world, the study came back and proved that stress has become our new normal. We as a people say we are stressed more often than we are not stressed. And that really is, in terms of the immensity of it, a fairly recent progression inside of our humans and our societies. And so I'm true of that as well. My life is true of that as well. So I didn't realize, I think, the immense stress that had been building in me across the last number of years with family and platform growth and leadership needs and just general life progression. And the pandemic really provided this opportunity where I would say that this has been an iceberg that's been building a long time under the surface. And the panic attacks just became the visible part of this larger iceberg of stress and anxiety that I had to deal with. I had to wrestle with because I could see it. And underneath the surface was all this stress that had been built up for a long time. For me, that looked like we're all noise-induced. So I've had a lot of self-discovery actually into my neurochemistry and my wiring. I'm a part of this group of people, about 15% of the population they tag as highly sensitive to stimulation. That's me. I didn't know that about myself till this. It's been really fruitful to discover that. My brain is literally wired to just be more responsive to stimulation. So when my 1.5-year-old would knock a Yeti cup off the shelf while I was stressed and thinking about work, everything would start spiraling, and I would have tears in my eyes, and I would have like you said, my breathing would pick up the pace, and it was like I literally had to put my head in my hands and cover my eyes and find some sort of darkness to have less stimulation. It would take me 30, 45 minutes to recover at times. I could feel the after effects for the better part of the day, and I felt like I was kind of on edge throughout the rest of the day. That was kind of on the edge of tears at times, as my body recovers from this immense symptoms of stress and anxiety, and this kind of heightened event. And
sure.
So that was my experience with it. Yeah.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, as if nothing else, I wanted you to see this book, this article, I should say. I'm a Christian author and having panic attacks. You might also want to find his book, Peace, Finding Rest in a Stressed Out World. But we also want to talk about First 15. You can go to first15.org, and we're going to talk about what's there right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We have a few more minutes with Craig Denison, and we are talking about First 15, a daily devotional guide. Let me also mention some other resources we have posted on our website today. One is Suicide, a white paper by Dr. Jim Denison, and it's just one of many white papers, but since we've just been coming off of National Suicide Awareness Month last month, we wanted to talk about that. Also have that link that you can find to the Christian Post, which I would encourage you to read and maybe post on your Facebook page. page or your Twitter feed. I'm a Christian author and I'm having panic attacks, but I wanted to focus some time, Craig, if we could, on First 15. And people can go to first15.org and find a number of things. They can sign up with their email to receive the devotional guides. And I might just mention that you also can put First 15 on your phone. Just click on iPhone or Android and have that. But let's talk about some of the resources, because you have videos, you have a blog, you have podcast. I know you and your wife do worship. So talk about some of the resources people will find at first15.org.
Yeah, thanks, Kerby. Yeah, I think one of the main reasons that we want to start First 15 the way that we did, being donor funded and being primarily digital, is my passion is simply to remove as many barriers as possible between us and the presence of God. God has made his presence available to us. So how can we as his people every single day begin our days connecting to that presence? And in John 15, we know that as we abide in the vine, the natural byproduct of doing that is bearing fruit for the kingdom's sake. So that's the calling. It's in the calling I have around First 15 and the opportunity to use digital technology towards that. And so however many platforms we can be on that are fruitful towards people experiencing God, we want to be on those platforms. Any barriers we can remove to make it as easy as possible to wake up in the midst of the busyness of the morning and the busyness of our days to start your day in God's presence. And we actually just this month crossed 5 million downloads on our First 15 podcast, which has been a huge marker for us and has been really exciting. It's amazing to see how God's people, we are wired and we have an insatiable need to be able to meet with our Creator and to know him in an intimate way. And so as we make this resource available, it's amazing how people are coming to these platforms and using them to find that experience with God every day.
Let's see if we can talk about a couple of them. First of all, your vlog or your video, Find Value, Find Rest. I thought that was a perfect way, maybe antidote to some of the issues of panic. You have a section there on building blocks for your time with God. And in some respects, that brings us back to the First 15. Explain that if you might.
Yeah, sure thing. So spending time alone with God absolutely transformed every facet of my life. I found that rhythm at a low point in my life in college and began to keep that with consistency, and it has informed every major life transition, informs what God does in my life every day. It has been so important and meaningful for me. And so the opportunity came to me in 2015 to launch First 15, this idea of beginning your day, your first 15 minutes of your day in God's presence with worship and reading and prayer. And doing this not necessarily as a teaching resource, but more really as a guide to help you get to that place of meaningful connection and experience with God. And so we do that through worship and this devotional thoughts that I write, and then a time of guided prayer, a few prayer points for your morning to help you get to that place of connection and conversation with God on a daily basis. So that's the heart behind First 15 and the idea of it. And like you mentioned, we have companion resources to that to help inform that time alone with God. So we have books, we have vlogs that we put on YouTube. The idea of consume. We have podcast interviews with some key Christian leaders to talk about this idea of experiencing God and the season we're living in. We just launched a couple of podcasts with John Mark Comer and Pete Scazzaro in this last month, which were incredible conversations. And so through all these different platforms, we have a lot of resources to either talk about having this meaningful experience with God and meaningful relationship, or these guides to help you actually get to that place of experience and relationship with God on a daily basis.
Might mention your blog, too. You have a section here, 3 ways to talk to your kids about the election, Hamilton style. You also have one, God is calling us to participate in politics, and all sorts of other really very helpful material that we've talked about on this program. And so that's part of the blog and the podcast video. Also worship for just a minute. I mean, you have been involved with your wife, Rachel, for worship for some time, and for people that would want to connect up with you've had some thought about how that all fits together as well, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so much of our worship, which is really meaningful, goes towards our Sunday corporate expression. But I've found in my own life, and I think a lot of others have found, that there really is this opportunity to engage in worship in a more personal way on a daily basis leading up to that corporate expression of worship. So one of our ideas of what we do in First 15, every day there's a worship element. We allow you to have that experience. I think worship is maybe one of the most powerful spiritual disciplines, to not put yourself at the center of your time alone with God, but at the beginning of that time to say, God, you are the center, your character, your goodness, your will, your word is the center of this time alone with God. I have enough of myself. What I need is you. And starting our time alone with God in worship, putting him through adoration and declaration in the center is so meaningful. Worship is something I'd love to participate in. My wife and I lead worship together and write worship songs. Launching actually next February, we're planning on releasing quite a bit of original worship that we've written and that others in our community have written to help infuse into First 15, to have this opportunity for what we're calling weekday worship, to have worship that's meant for a personal encounter with God, that's a little less, loud and is inviting in those first moments of the morning in production, and helps people really find that presence of God's presence every day.
Might just mention, too, we have a link to first15.org as a website. We also have the link in the Facebook page and Twitter. This is all part of the broader ministry, Denison Ministries. I think a lot of our listeners are very familiar with the Denison Forum. That's your father. And in some respects, that's for the head. First 15 is sort of for the heart. But we might also, don't want to leave your mom out, Janet Denison and Christian parenting is another aspect of the Denison Ministries, and even though you're not involved in it on a day-to-day, I think you can probably describe to our listeners what they will find when they land on that particular brand of Denison Ministries, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually this weekend, we're having an event, a digital event for Christian parenting. It's coming up soon, and you can sign up for that online, and there's over 50 speakers, some really amazing speakers. Mark Batterson's in there. A lot of amazing people are contributing content to this digital event for parents. So Christian parenting was Mom's vision. How do we infuse Christ into the center of these Christian homes? And as we have this movement that's happening through Denison Ministries and around the world outside of Denison Ministries, of God's Spirit, how do we invite God and Christ into the center of our homes? So that's a lasting movement. And then Mom has incredible resources on studying Scripture, and she teaches a vast amount of people on the subject of biblical discernment and wisdom. And she has an online Bible study she's leading right now for thousands of people that is producing so much fruit in these people's lives with discussions and forums. And so through janetdenison.com/org and christianparenting.org, you can find ways to access those digital resources and events and Bible studies and resources for the Christian home as well.
And again, all that's in Denison Ministries. And again, we have most of those links to you to find right there as well. One from the Denison Forum on suicide. Of course, this very good article that appeared in Christian Post by Craig Denison on panic attacks, and of course, all the great material at First 15. So if nothing else, Craig, say hi to your dad and your mom, and look forward to the next opportunity to get one of the Denisons on the program. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks, Kerby.
We are going to take a break, and then tomorrow, going to leave a fair amount of time to kind of summarize what we have learned and in many cases have not learned from the confirmation hearings for Amy Coney Barrett. We do have a banner there. If you have not contacted your 2 United States senators, you can do that. We spent a little bit of time in this hour today just looking at loneliness, suicide, panic attacks, soul hunger, and much, much more. And we will continue that kind of conversation probably next week, but we'll get back into the news cycle tomorrow. We also, the second hour, will be talking about leadership and how to get various generations working together. So it's going to be a good hour or two together getting on all the various topics necessary. And if you'd like more information about some of the conversations we've had today, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. You can simply click on the button that says see more. And by the way, I did mention my Viewpoints commentary on the crisis of loneliness. But that is something you can read, and you can also sign up to receive it on a regular basis, any one of the commentaries. I want to thank Andrew and Steve. We will see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.